Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most fastest growing horror game franchises ever. Everyone knows about it. Heck, it's so popular that there's a movie for this game. It started off as a PC point and click game and it turned into a movie. Now, I'm not your typical horror game enthusiast. Jump scares aren't my idea of a good time. Oh, frick it! But there's a distinct feeling to the thrill of a FNAF game that got me hooked. Not to mention the deep lore and intriguing animatronics and countless games and gameplay styles they each have. And that's why I've embarked on the quest to complete every single Five Nights at Freddy's game on the Nintendo Switch. It all starts with a physical core collection. And before we start things off, my intention is not to jump scare you. I will not add jump scares, so you can watch with ease. This is also a good time to say, if you're young and you get frightened easy, maybe click off of this video. Check out my other videos because there's lots to watch for you, all ages. I love you, bye-bye. Most Five Nights at Freddy's games are a simple point and click style. So will these games on a console with controllers be of benefit, or will it hinder my playthroughs? My main goal in playing all these games on the Nintendo Switch is to determine if there's any noticeable drawbacks or inconsistencies with the franchise. Or maybe some of these ports are buggy and have horrible porting methods. And you'll soon find out. Some just shouldn't exist on Switch. Let's start with the OG FNAF, Five Nights at Freddy's 1. The first game wasn't one I played much of. In fact, I don't think I ever played this game past night 2. Revisiting this game on a new Switch playthrough was a lot of fun. Keeping the animatronics at bay while staying in the room on minimum power. Once the power goes out, you may get visited by Mr. Freddy himself. The main objective is to keep the animatronics out by closing the doors and having enough power to keep you on until 6 a.m. So here's how the controls work. Instead of you using a mouse to click around, you're using the A and B buttons for the door and the light. You can then flick up your monitor using one of the back bumpers. Once you're looking at the cameras, you can simply use the left stick and flip between them. This was super simple and responsive. The only drawback from what I could tell is that you couldn't jump directly to the camera you wanted. You had to cycle through each camera until you got the one you want. Despite that, I did find that clicking buttons on the controller was a lot faster than dragging your mouse back and forth and being accurate. There were a few times where I would accidentally click the wrong button for the door or the light, but that's on me. Something I learned while playing through some of these games was that Five Nights at Freddy's is a franchise where you need to build your muscle memory. So for Five Nights at Freddy's 1, I definitely prefer the Switch/console version, and the performance was great. Nothing out of the ordinary. If it can play on my iPod Touch, I don't think there'd be any issue on the Switch. One thing to mention about each game is, of course, touchscreen. Just like mobile games, FNAF 1 does have touchscreen controls, but it's a little different. It's playable, but instead of tapping one side, then the camera pans, you have to drag your finger across the screen to move your view, and then tap to interact with the buttons, which are very touchy, because if you move your hand at all, you might accidentally move the camera. One benefit is that you can check the cameras in any order. You don't need to use the Joy-Cons for this one, but just wait, because the touchscreen on the next few games gets a little more confusing. This game was fantastic, and I genuinely enjoyed playing this iconic game all the way through for the first time. It's basic, it's clean, and it's a fantastic opener to the franchise. This is also a good time to mention that as we go through these games, I'll be ranking them. Tier list mode enabled. FNAF 1, A tier. Next, FNAF 2, the game I played the most of in my past. It was so nostalgic being back in the doorless facility. Here, you have 2 vents and a main hallway. Animatronics would flood through the front and peer through the vents. When there's an animatronic directly in front of you or beside you, you need to throw on your mask to trick them into thinking that you're one of them. Hopefully they can't smell the increasingly growing yellow puddle underneath me. There's also the flashlight, which has battery. This flashlight is primarily used to keep Foxy at bay. By flashing at him, he will stay away, like his parents taught him. The controls are very similar to the first game, except this time there's more to keep track of. Oh, the music box. You have to keep the music box wound up. By hitting the back bumpers, you can flick up the monitor and use the mask. While looking at the monitor and juggling the cameras, it's very similar to the first game, except there's movement on these cameras. Of course, if you played or watched this, you'll know there's not too much of a point at looking at the cameras, as the only thing you need to keep track of on the monitor is the music box. A lot of the game is just sound cues and muscle memory. One thing that's a huge benefit of this version is how quickly you can do things with your controller. With a mouse, you'd have to quickly move the cursor to the mask, to the camera, to the music box, or to the lights, which just takes way more time than pressing a button on a controller. Here, it's seamless with the controller and a lot easier to react to, especially the music box. My only gripe I had with this version of the game was that I felt the bumpers should be swapped. The mobile and PC versions had the mask on the left side and the monitor on the right side, but here the bumpers are swapped, with the right bumper being the mask and the left being the monitor. I did eventually get used to it, but I would have liked to see the consistency between these games. And there's touchscreen! Yay! except it's impossible to play using the screen alone. It's very similar to FNAF 1, where you would need to drag your finger across the screen to move the camera, which is awfully slow. And I find myself misinputting very often. But it's impossible to play solely with touch controls because you can't use your flashlight at all. You need to click the A button to do that. And switching back and forth between the buttons and the touchscreen, it just doesn't feel good. So touchscreen isn't a great option for this game. This game is fantastic. I'm a little biased because it's a classic from my youth, but I gotta give it an A rank as well. Some may say it's not as good as the first one, but I think it's a little better. Next, we have FNAF 3. I played this one the least back in my day. There was something that didn't quite hook me. I think it was mainly the fact I didn't find the gameplay as simple, and it was a little difficult to follow. And fast forward to today, I don't get it. I don't get it. Oh, I hate this. I don't know where he is. I don't know. I don't understand the gameplay mechanics. It was a lot easier for me to grasp the first two games. What in the world? Yeah, I didn't understand. In fact, FNAF 3 was the first game I didn't finish all 5 nights in. For me, the gameplay felt confusing. I could never figure out where Springtrap was. But mainly, it wasn't that fun or thrilling. Maybe that's just a me thing. I didn't have the drive to complete it like the last entries. Oh, and I don't think I got jump scared once by Springtrap. It was mainly the phantom animatronics that got my hand shaking. Now, the Switch version was fine. You had to use the L bumper to open the camera and the reboot panel. And the cameras were similar to past installments. Except here, using the controller to switch between each camera wasn't as easy as the past 2 FNAF games, since you need to use the camera more in this game. Having a mouse would have been more intuitive. So I actually wouldn't say for the first time that this is best on Switch. Unlike the last 2 entries, they completely removed the touchscreen features for this one. No idea why, but I don't really care. Personally, this is going in the C tier. I'm sorry FNAF 3 fans, it just wasn't for me. Next is FNAF 4, the one where you listen. Here you go from door to door, try not to get jump scared by these horrific creatures! Now, before we move further, this is by far the scariest game yet. This game is purely sound cues. And while a lot of FNAF games also use sound cues, this one is absolutely crucial. That being said, I probably should have used headphones. Instead, I cranked my TV soundbar louder than I ever had before until I heard crickets. No frickin' way I'm putting it that high. I've never had my soundbar this high. Why did I do this? It was incredibly loud the first time I got jump scared. Oh! So after cleaning the stain off my couch, I played over and over and over again until night 2. Now I have no clue why, but I could not get past night 2 for the life of me. I was obviously doing something wrong here. The premise is that you walk up to each door and listen closely. If you hear breathing at the door, you hit B and close the door. If you don't hear breathing, you flash your light and go back to the bed. You can also look behind your bed to see if Freddy is slowly forming from these bobblehead baby Freddy things. So with all things considered, and me only making it to night 2, I think this was the only game that had my heart rate going above 100 BPM the entire time. But it's also for that reason I needed to stop, for my health and my sanity. I needed to take a break.
How many more nights do I have to go? I don't wanna change my pants again. So why am I playing these games if I don't hate myself at 6 a.m. in the game? I'm playing this title on a cartridge. The core collection fills my homepage. Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and a blue bunny really wanna scare me off my chair. I'm waiting for the bear. I feel like something's there. Wait, don't shut off the lights. I can't take another night. At least I'm playing the entire franchise on a handheld device.
It's undeniable that FNAF 4 is for the hardcore FNAF fans, and for those who have a healthy heart. But I have to put it here, B. Even though I stopped, I couldn't help but want to go back. Next, we have Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location. Exotic Butters. Out of all Five Nights at Freddy's games on Nintendo Switch, Sister Location seemed to be the worst performing so far. So unoptimized that it would give away a jump scare before even jump scaring you. Like in Night 2, while you're sneaking past Ballora, you try to avoid her as she's roaming around and playing her music. But if she catches you, the second before you get jump scared, your character freezes because the Switch needs time to process your fatality. This completely gives away the jump scare. Overall, this game just runs badly on Switch. When first entering a vent or Ballora's room, the frame rate would dip and chug. Or when you get past Ballora's room and make it to Funtime Freddy. Here, you're supposed to restart the power, and while you're looking at the monitor, he teleports and moves around. The thing is, I know every time he's moving around because the frame rate tanks. The gameplay is composed of a bunch of tasks, and these tasks can be stressful and thrilling, but a lot lot of them, especially at the beginning, can be slow and monotonous. So the gameplay for this one in general just isn't my favorite. And also the cursor feels kind of weird. You move the cursor with your analog sticks and the camera follows the cursor at a certain point. Also, if you push both sticks, the cursor moves even faster. I think it probably would have made more sense for the camera to move with your right stick and the cursor with your left. And also there's no touchscreen controls either. I know the lore is really great and mysterious in this game, but the gameplay wasn't all there for me. It was also hard, and I'm bad at these games. So this is going into the sweet little C. Next we have Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. This game is very different from other FNAF games, as it's a pizzeria simulator as well, because surviving wasn't enough. Here you'll run your own Freddy Fazbear's restaurant, buying supplies, entertainment, and of course, animatronics, if you want, because this game is only as hard as you make it. So of course, being the man baby I am, I made it super easy for myself. I took the easy route, because why would I want to get scared? Don't judge me, don't judge me! This obviously can get tricky, and the lore in this game is also pretty wild if you dig a little deeper, especially if you salvage animatronics and buy sus items. The controls are oddly different when compared to the other Switch ports. The ZL and ZR buttons are being used and they look into your side vents while you're doing your daily tasks. You can also use the top bumper to swap between what you want to see on your computer. And touchscreen! Finally, the first FNAF game that supports the touchscreen since FNAF 2, although Pizzeria Simulator is kind of picky when it comes to what's actually touchable. Touchscreen only works when you're pressing objects you planted around your pizzeria, and when you click the finished button. Aside from that, you have to use your physical controls. So yeah, anyways, B-tier that baby. Now, Ultimate Custom Night. This one is such an odd game. It's just like deciding how high your future therapy bill will be. This is a game where you set the difficulty and can play with who you want. There are also pre-created modes called challenges, and it sure is. This game is like any FNAF game you want it to be. The amount of animatronics that are in this is just insane, literally from every prior title before this release. Now, this game can get extremely complicated. So many things to look for, so many things to keep track of, and an unbelievable amount of jump scares. How is it on Switch? Well, it looks and runs smooth, but there's a few things I noticed, and I don't know if it's on all versions or just the Switch. First, look at the mask. Looks fine, right? Well, it's not cropped properly. You can see the frame outlined at the bottom and the sides of the mask, and you can see the floor through it. This can't be on purpose. And the other major thing about this version is that there's been reports that Ultimate Custom Night on Switch has issues where you can't defend yourself against Chica from FNAF 1, so that sucks. The last thing I realized is that the cursor is not great. Unlike the previous Switch ports, you have to drag your cursor and click cameras instead of toggling through them. This whole game needs to be played with this cursor, and that can be very difficult, especially if you're using the Joy-Cons. And there's not even touchscreen, and would have made more sense with the way the cameras control, but they probably wouldn't have even implemented it well anyways. So PC would be better for this one. Also, this game is mean for jump scaring me at the beginning without my consent. Please adjust your volume until you can hear whispering. What the f? But for me, it's going with the C tier, gang. Next is Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted. The thing is, after playing this, I'm the one that wants help. First of all, this game still thinks we're in VR. Because it was originally a VR game, they ported it for those who are broke! No, I'm just kidding. Powered by Unreal Engine 4, which is notoriously bad on the Nintendo Switch, and sadly doesn't work with Labo. Five Nights at Freddy's was originally a VR game for the PSVR and PC, which I bought and played back in the day, for some reason.
Oh my fat! Oh my gosh, she was moving towards me! I said, oh my fat!
Yeah, that was on this channel 4 years ago. I don't know what I was thinking. These games are undoubtedly made for VR and should not have been ported to console, especially the Switch. This game runs at an extremely sluggish 30 frames per second, maybe, and the motion blur is absolutely cranked sometimes, and sometimes the motion blur just is off, which just feels weird. The camera movement is also really touchy, especially with Joy-Cons. Again, this game was never meant for analog sticks. Thankfully, they allowed you to snap the camera to key locations like the vents in FNAF 2 or the hallway in FNAF 1. But when you snap the camera to those places, you get shocked with the motion blur. But one of the most noticeable things is the input latency. I don't know if it's just a low frame rate, but that, plus the heavy motion blur, makes this game feel like there's a ton of lag. The overall art style is cool, and it's very interesting and neat to see these iconic games I just replayed but from a different perspective, like how the camera panel isn't a monitor I have to flip up, instead it's just a camera console, or how you can see these animatronics move around instead of just appearing. But there's just a lack of polish on the Switch version, and playing the original games in VR in this game is definitely not as solid or smooth as just playing the original game on the Switch. These are just slightly harder versions of the original, but they're only harder because you're fighting against latency and controls. Speaking of controls, the Switch version has a very odd layout. You can tell they were a little lazy porting this over, mainly because the action button is B instead of A. So to click yes, I'd have to click B, which is highly unusual for a Switch game. Obviously, they just wanted to get this on the Switch because of the huge player base the Switch has. Another reason I wouldn't recommend the Switch version is because the PlayStation version exists. If you have a PS4, there's so much more value because you get both the console port and the PSVR version, assuming you have a PSVR. So it runs better and you can play it the way it was intended if that's an option. And it's the same price as the Switch version. PS4 is just the way to play this one. I may have been slightly harsh on Sister Location for the performance, but I gotta say, this is a lot worse. There's extreme texture popping when you load into a game, and some textures don't even seem to load in, like this vent door. This looks so pixelated. So overall, this game itself might be pretty good, but the Switch version is simply not. This gangster is bad, going into D. Next, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. This game changes everything. Instead of you just sitting around, you're going through places and walking around. This is completely different than past games. It's the most open. I won't get into too much about how this game runs, because you can check out my full breakdown in a separate video where I tell you if it's best on Switch, but I'll briefly talk about it. This game runs at 30 frames per second and looks decent for a Switch game. It's honestly better than the PS4 version just because the team who ported it did well. Well, it's better than the PS4 version at launch at least. There are some graphical differences like shading, resolution, and as mentioned, the frame rate, but the game is more than playable, unless it crashes on you, which unfortunately it did. At the play place, I was stuck here and could not move. Everything froze. I hoped everything would kick back into gear, but I ended up having to quit and restart the whole segment. You can finally walk like a normal game. The right stick moves the camera and the left stick moves Gregory, which is who you play as. Overall, I had a pretty good time with this, but there was a few things I noticed that I wasn't a huge fan of. Sometimes I just wouldn't really know what to do because it was such a big departure from the previous games. Like here, where I need to sneak past Chica. It took me forever to figure out for some reason. What sucked the most was the fact I had to sit through the excruciatingly long load times between each scare. Security Breach is by far the most impressive FNAF game on the system, and it's an absolute miracle in the first place. This game kept me on my toes and gave me enough of a challenge to want to continue and keep playing it and not give up. There's also the lack of the new Free Ruin DLC, which is apparently pretty good. The development team says it's not on Switch or Xbox due to them wanting to focus on one console. Okay, so we might eventually get it, but there's no telling when. This is B tier. You may have realized there's some games I didn't mention. Well, that's because those games aren't on Switch. The Switch has yet to see Five Nights at Freddy's AR, which the Switch will never have because it doesn't have a camera, unless you're counting the silly little IR camera that's on the Joy-Con. And apparently the game's not even that good anyways. But the most unfortunate is the lack of FNAF World. This is an RPG which is just amazing. It's cute, it's quirky, and it's just a fun time. There are also so many characters. It would have been really fun to play this one for sure. Also, Freddy in Space, which is a new game that just got released. And U2's presents aren't here either. So yeah, that's every Five Nights at Freddy's game on the Nintendo Switch. And now you know what to play. Once again, you can check out my full video on Security Breach right there. And consider liking and subscribing if you want. I hope to see you in the next one. I'm gonna go watch the movie. See you later.